email had been hacked with this
Yeah.
going on. But the notification for the float and the tri-tip
Yeah.
donate, that's legitimate, right?
Yeah, so I'm going to send out a second email because when I got into the office on Monday morning, I had 3 emails like, hey, I think you've been hacked. And I should have taken a deep breath. We got the message out as fast as possible. I wasn't hacked, I was cloned. And so the email that went out was from an email address called Matt St. Stephen's Arinda at gmail.com. So nobody broke into the Matt at ststephensarinda.org. They just created an email address that looked like mine. They used my contact information, so they didn't actually hack my account. They just cloned it. But it's just a kind of a frustrating reality of, and then he actually sent me an email, and I was like, hey, we've alerted the whole church to this. Nobody else going to fall for it. And he goes, well, they might. Why don't you pay me and I'll stop. I was like, just knock it off. So anyway, but yeah, so less than savory, but yeah. So well, thank you all for being here. I'm going to try and there we go. Give you a primer on what General Convention is, but one of the things I want to kind of start with is what questions do you have? Are there any kind of burning questions other than what is General Convention? Yeah, Barbara.
This may be off topic, but we mentioned 2 bishops today.
Yes.
Why are there 2 bishops right now?
So the Diocese of Northern California does have 2 bishops. Yeah, so let me, so there's, it's a great question. So there's actually 3 different kinds of bishops in the Episcopal Church. What we're used to in this diocese is only having one, and that's a diocesan bishop. That's the bishop who is the head of the corporation, the soul, and has the both financial and spiritual control of the diocese. Larger dioceses like Connecticut, Los Angeles, Boston, or Massachusetts, they'll have something called suffragan bishops. The name kind of implies what they do. They're suffering. So they're elected as a bishop. They're a member of the House of Bishops. They can do all the things a bishop does when it comes to confirming, receiving, ordaining, but they are never going to be the head of the diocese. So they're kind of a constant vice president of the diocese. Now, Bishop Austin was elected at the bishop coadjutor. So the bishop coadjutor recognizes that there is a diocesan bishop, and when the diocesan bishop retires or is incapacitated, it's almost always retires, the bishop coadjutor at that exact moment automatically becomes the diocesan bishop. So right now and this is different so when we move from Bishop Swing to Bishop Mark, we literally handed the crozier over. So we only had one diocesan bishop. And at the consecration service, everything gets transferred for a variety of reasons, but I think most important to Bishop Mark was the ability to vote in the election of the new presiding bishop. The bishop and the standing committee structured it as a bishop coadjutor. So Bishop Austin is a full bishop in the church, and when Bishop Mark retires in a month, he'll automatically become the diocesan bishop. So that's the main difference between a suffragan bishop who will never become diocesan bishop. So in the Diocese of LA, there's 3 suffragan bishops. If the diocesan bishop retires, they'll hold an election for a new one. They won't select from the 3 who are currently serving. So yeah, great question. Yeah.
Sort of a technical question.
Love them.
How many dioceses are there in California? And if you're a delegate to the convention, how many delegates does each diocese get? Is that based on population?
Nope.
Or
Well,
what?
there's a slide about that. So to answer your question, there's 6 dioceses in California. So from the Oregon border heading south, there's Northern California, which is the Oregon border down to like Highway 12. There's the Diocese of California, which is the 6 counties that border the bay left and right. So Marin and Sonoma County, Sonoma and Napa County are part of Northern California. There's El Camino Real, which is San Jose to Santa Barbara. I just forgot the,
Central Valley, probably?
yeah, but it's got a name and I'm just blanking on it. I'll show you in a second what the map is. But then every diocese gets 8 deputies, 4 clergy and 4 lay. And we'll talk about that in a slide. So great questions, yeah. Perfect. Well, so what I wanted to kind of cover a little bit is introducing and understanding the polity of the Episcopal Church, which in recent years has been shortened to the acronym TEC. There's also understanding the structure of General Convention. And then, General Convention is this big thing that happens far away. It moves every 3 years. So this year it's in Louisville. Next year, I believe, or in 3 years, I think it's somewhere in the Pacific Northwest. But it does eventually start to have effects on our diocese and even our parish here at St. Stephen's, and we'll have a few slides to talk about that. So let me go to, since we're recording this. Oh, there we go. Perfect. All right. So one of the things that I think is helpful to talk about is what's in a name. Shakespeare asked it famously in Romeo and Juliet. So the Episcopal Church started in 1785. How many of us saw the musical Hamilton? How many remember when Hamilton was facing off with a certain Samuel Seabury? Okay, Samuel Seabury was a Church of England priest. He would later become the very first bishop in the Episcopal Church, but what would become the Episcopal Church was in a rather difficult position. Almost all of them were loyal to the crown, which is fine before the Revolutionary War, but after the Revolutionary War, people started to look at them suspiciously. They also had a Book of Common Prayer that prayed for the king and not for, although there wasn't yet, a president of the United States. So after the Revolutionary War settles, we have this tradition of a particular kind of worship in the English style, but we are no longer affiliated with the crown. What do? Well, in 1785, representatives from 6 of the new states gathered together in convention and started the Protestant Episcopal Church in the United States. Which was for 2 centuries shortened to PECUSA, which is a horrible, horrible acronym. Eventually, lawyers get involved, as they always do. And in 1821, General Convention reorganized itself and affiliated itself into the Domestic and Foreign Missionary Society and was incorporated in New York State. Where it was recognized by the state legislature. New York remains the corporate, the location of our corporation's soul. So technically, the Domestic and Foreign Mission Society, the DFMS, is incorporated in New York, and so we're bound by the laws of incorporation by the state of New York. And so for most of the 20th century, PECUSA is kind of how we identified ourselves. There are some really interesting vestiges of DFMS. So when St. Stephen's fills out its parochial report, so every year we fill out this report. How many people are members of your church? what was the giving, how many services did you hold, how many weddings, how many confirmations, how many baptisms. That website is dfms.reports.org. So this kind of still shows up, but PECUSA for most of the 20th century is kind of who we are. The problem is, San Joaquin, there's the name of it. The problem is, so this is the provinces of the Episcopal Church. But if we call it the Protestant Episcopal Church of the United States, what that kind of, in our mind, limits is we have, as part of our denomination, the churches in Cuba, Haiti, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, as well as Colombia, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Equatorial Central, Ecuador Littoral, Honduras, and Venezuela, as well as Taiwan. All of this is part of the Protestant Episcopal Church of the United States, but the church is bigger than the United States. And so what happened is PECUSA no longer felt relevant. And so what we did is we kind of, because the church represents 22 different countries or territories, the modern acronym is just TEC, which I think is a little bit more inclusive and kind of recognizes that we are a international church as part of a broader Anglican communion. So we can kind of go from big to small, right? So this is the entire Anglican communion where there is a recognized church. So we've got PECUSA, which is this yellow along with all of this. There's the Church of Canada, there's the Church of Mexico. This is basically the prayers of the people when we're praying for the broader churches. We're going to go all throughout the world to pray for these various national or kind of confederacies of national churches throughout the world. So this is the entire Anglican communion. So all of us are in communion with the Archbishop of Canterbury. Kind of think of it as the See of Canterbury is the hub of the bicycle tire, and all of these churches kind of are in communion with that see, with that Archbishop. What that generally means is we don't have to agree with other spokes, but we all have to be in communion with the Archbishop of Canterbury. So that's the global Anglican communion. Here we've got TEC, which again is the United States along with churches in the Caribbean, Central and South America, as well as the Convocation of American Churches in Europe. If you're ever on the south side of the Seine, as you're kind of turning the corner towards the Eiffel Tower, you'll see the cathedral in Paris. It's probably the best job in the Episcopal Church is to be the dean of that cathedral. And then here's our small little diocese here, right? So we've got Marin, Contra Costa, Alameda, San Francisco, and San Mateo counties all represented here. So we kind of go from biggest to smallest. Yeah.
Isn't Taiwan also part of?
Yep. Oh, thank you. Yes, Taiwan as well. Oh, there it is. Yeah, sorry. That's what I did. And then just, so these color codings, and as you saw on the earlier slide, we're divided into provinces. I'll talk about that in a second, but it's basically a small kind of geographical region of grouping of dioceses. But we'll talk about that in a second. All right. I think it is really helpful to analogize how TEC operates to how our civil government is organized. And we kind of do it from top down and bottom up. So if you look at the global Anglican communion, the closest analog to that is the UN. TEC and General Convention look a lot like our federal government here in the United States. Where there is kind of no good analogy is the provincial level. Like we don't have, like there's no organization of West Coast states or the Rocky Mountain states don't kind of have a sub-organization. The diocese functions very much like a state. The deanery is kind of our, and in this diocese, literally our county government. The parish is the city and the congregation is a town. The difference between a congregation and a parish is the presence of a rector, which is defined as full-time employment. So if you're a congregation or a mission church, the only difference is, well, there's two differences. One is you can't afford full-time clergy, and you're not individually incorporated. So St. Stephen's Orinda is its own corporation. The vestry is its board. I serve as the president. A congregation is held in trust on behalf of the bishop. So, and so if we reverse these, who are all these things led by? Well, the congregation is led by the bishop and the bishop's committee. It's pretty similar to Moraga, right? Moraga is a town, not a city, so it doesn't have a mayor. Its police force is the sheriff's deputies, not its own police force, right? Whereas the parish, it's the rector and the vestry who kind of act as the mayor and the city council. Our deanery reps kind of are the county board of supervisors. They listen to things that affect several churches, and they help try to advocate to the diocese, which is led by the bishop, diocesan convention, the standing committee, and executive council. It operates a lot like how our governor and our legislature run our state. Province, again, there's kind of no analog. Tech is led by the presiding bishop, who's the president of the president of the Episcopal Church. And then General Convention, which has two houses, the House of Deputy and the House of Bishops, which looks a lot like kind of 2/3 of our federal government, the president and the Congress. And then there's the Anglican Communion, which are led by primates. I apologize why the, there we go. Kind of looks like the UN. Does this make sense, kind of structurally? There's a reason why this makes sense. I think it's on the next slide. This is the seal of General Convention, and notice this date, 1785. The first General Convention was held in Philadelphia in 1785. And what would grow out of General Convention was first a national and then an international coalition led by a bicameral house led under a president. If that sounds familiar, it's because a year later, there would be another gathering in Philadelphia, or 2 years later, called the Constitutional Convention. And 27 of the 55 delegates who went to the American Constitutional Convention were at, or were part of the Episcopal Church that met 2 years earlier in Philadelphia. The running joke is that General Convention came up with how to run an organization, and they just kept the idea when we decided how to kind of reorganize ourselves as the United States. We have the same bicameral House structure. We elect a president for a term of years. If it sounds familiar to our civil government, it's because there's a lot of overlap. So 27 of the 55 delegates were Episcopalian. Remember, something like 4 out of the first 7 presidents were members of the Episcopal Church. So part of our historical heritage of being a colonial church is the people who benefited from that system happen to be from England and part of the ruling religious denomination from England, right? That separates us from Quakers. All right. So like Congress, General Convention is composed of 2 houses. So the first is the House of Deputies. If you ever serve as a deputy, it is your bounden duty to remind every bishop that they are part of the junior house. Everybody thinks the bishops have the power, but In 1785, we didn't have a bishop yet. Part of what General Convention did was organize that we needed bishops, and so then we authorized any of 3 gentlemen to become the first bishop of the Episcopal Church, and to do that, we needed to find some Scotsmen who didn't really love the English crown very much. That's a lecture for a different day. But the House of Deputies and the House of Bishops, that's what makes General Convention. And this gets to John's earlier question. It's composed of 8 members from every diocese. At Diocesan Convention, we elect 4 clergy, which is either priest or deacons, and 4 lay members. So the whole delegation is 8, and each order has 4 alternates as well. So it doesn't matter on size, every diocese gets 8. And elections are held about a year and a half before General Convention, because as a deputy, you're assigned to committees. Work for General Convention didn't start yesterday. It started 2 years ago. At the close of the last General Convention, you start getting named to committees, you're hearing legislation come before you. Everything that we learned about how a bill becomes law, it's the exact same process in the Episcopal Church. People submit resolutions, it gets referred to committees, the committees will make, kind of help it along, amend it, drop it, move it forward. So this work really begins about a year and a half ahead of time. So this is how General Convention will gather today. So every diocese has a table. And so if we find, so here's my old diocese, Northern California. I think California, I can't remember where it is. I should have circled it. But every diocese is represented. What you'll notice is most of the Spanish-speaking dioceses are up here, and that's just to help facilitate live translation, so that people can hear what's going on in their native language. So this is kind of where most of the translation will happen. We have the official youth presence, but every diocese is, and there are 8 deputies. This is how, at this General Convention, where everybody is seated. So here's a picture. So I served as a deputy for the Diocese of Northern California at the last General Convention. This was the General Convention that wasn't. So General Convention used to be 12 days long, and it used to be a giant party for the Episcopal Church. So one of the things, especially for clergy, is every seminary has a reception where all the alumni get to come and gather and have good food. There's a giant vendors hall where people can sell stoles and fine linen, anything you could ever imagine. Because of the impacts of COVID, General Convention 80 was delayed by a year. It almost didn't happen. And when it did happen, it happened over 4 days, not 12. The legislative sessions ran from 8 in the morning till 9:30 at night. There was no exhibitors hall, there were no parties, there was, it was basically meet and then go back to your hotel rooms and try not to spread COVID. So here I am with our deputation. And then before I came to St. Stephen's, I was actually elected as the chair of the deputation of the Diocese of Northern California. So I got to be involved in some of those early planning meetings as the chair of our deputation. But one of the as I moved to this diocese, resigned that chair. And so Robin Denny, who's the rector at the Church of Napa, and a great good friend, she's our new chair of the Diocese of Northern California. So, yeah, let me just pause there. Are there any questions? I don't kind of want to run off about the deputation. Yeah, John.
The deputies at the diocesan level, are they, the lay people, are they elected at the diocesan
Yeah, so.
convention, or how does that work?
Yeah, so it won't be at this fall's diocesan convention, but next fall there'll be an election and all 16 people will be elected at the same time. So there'll be 4 clergy and 4 alternates, and then 4 lay people Yeah, 16. And then 4 alternates. So all 16 will be elected at next year's diocesan convention. That'll give them that year and a half to be assigned to committees, start planning, start travel, all that good stuff. Yeah.
How often are the diocesan conventions? Every year?
Every year, but general convention is every 3 years. So we only elect every 3 years as well. So that was the problem with moving general convention is we only approved a budget for 3 years, and then we bled into the 4th year. And so then it was a question of, well, let's keep it basically was a continuing resolution like we hear in Congress, right? When the federal government's about to run out of money, actually that's the debt limit, slightly different, but you can tell I was a politics major. Right, it's a continuing resolution. We're going to continue to fund everything at its old level. The question was, are we going to turn around and do a 2-year turnaround and get back on track, or go push General Convention 81 to next summer 2025? Everybody thought, let's get back to the 3-year cycle, and so that's why it was a very short turnaround, which is 2 years this time. So, yeah. So in addition to the House of Deputies, there's the House of Bishops, which is the junior house, and it's comprised of every active bishop and every retired bishop in the church. I don't know how they run themselves. It's because it's a very smaller, much smaller group. There's probably, I would estimate, less than 150 bishops. When you have 108 dioceses with each with 8 deputies plus the official youth presence, you've got about 900 deputies in the House of Deputies, less than 150 in the House of Bishops. They can be just far more casual. They all know each other. How the House of Deputies runs itself is really amazing. There's speaker stations that are set up. Everyone's given a credit card with a smart chip. So if I wanted to speak, I would go to one of these terminals and I would put in my card, and then the chair, the president of the House, would say like, oh, Matt Warren, a clergy deputy from the Diocese of Northern California, would like to speak. I recognize so-and-so. So it's very technologically advanced. It's really neat. What I can't overemphasize enough is how much General Convention looks like Congress. You've got a House, which is the House of Deputies. You've got the House of Bishops, which kind of feels like the Senate just because there's fewer members of them. And together they comprise General Convention. There are multiple standing commissions, which are comprised of members of both houses. So these are they are always meeting. So ecumenical and interreligious relations, formation and ministry development, liturgy and music, structured governance, constitution and canons, and world mission. Liturgy and music is where everybody wants to be. It's the hot committee because that's the committee where if we're going to make changes to the prayer book, this is the committee that's going to control it. There's a special kind of masochism that would come from wanting to be part of the structured governance and constitution and canons committee of the Episcopal Church. So keep your prayers for anybody who really is called to the passion of how our church is structured. So all of these groups will meet concurrently in committee. There'll be representatives from the House of Deputies as well as from the House of Bishops. And what I'll mention in a moment is it's really interesting when they don't agree with one another. When there's a split between how the bishops are feeling and how the deputies are feeling. Similar to our own system, both houses need to pass a resolution for it to become either canon law or part of our budget process. And this happens quite a bit, if the House of Deputies passes legislation and the bishops just don't vote on it, it dies kind of sine die at the close of business. So just like our federal government, there's strategies for how to kill or avoid talking about certain legislation. What I it's helpful to learn about the polity of the church, and thank you all for spending part of your Sunday to do exactly that. But one of the things I wanted to get to was how this General Convention might affect life here at St. Stephen's. There are literally thousands of resolutions that come up in the lead up to General Convention. There's probably maybe 500 that get passed. That's kind of a decent ballpark. Some of the resolutions might not have a huge impact on the day-to-day life of St. Stephen's, but there are a number of notable pieces of legislation that are up for and might impact St. Stephen's. So the most influential act of convention this year will be the election of a new presiding bishop. These are the 5 nominees for presiding bishop. So there's Scott Barker from Nebraska, Dee Duncan Probe from Central New York, Bishop Gutierrez from Pennsylvania, Sean Rowe from the Diocese of Western New York, and Robert Wright from the Diocese of Atlanta. If you've been following this, this is not without controversy. So the first kind of small moment of controversy is just like when the slate for bishop was announced, there's kind of a formal slate that is announced by the search committee, and that were these 4 gentlemen. There wasn't a woman bishop who was nominated or put forth. There is a nomination process that can happen before General Convention. It can't be from the floor, because we do need, just like our Episcopal elections, we do have to have time to conduct background checks and to make sure that everybody's on the up and up. What has happened is Bishop Gutierrez, Bishop Wright, and Bishop Duncan Probe, what has come up in the last couple of weeks is that there have been Title IV complaints accusing these 3 of conduct unbecoming. Now, what the talk of most of the churches is these are mostly retaliatory claims. The House of Bishops will be the ones who actually vote. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what shakes out. If I was a betting man, my money from a year ago was the Bishop Robert Wright from the Diocese of Atlanta would be our next presiding bishop. If I lose, I'll bring donuts next week to church. But that was kind of my feeling a year ago. And so the bishops, the House of Bishops elect, and then the House of Deputies votes to accept that election. In our history, we've never seen the House of Deputies reject the election from the House of Bishops, but it is possible. So we'll see if we make history. Yeah.
They give their spiel about how they want to see the Episcopal Church.
Yeah, and it happened.
When they go in besides the.
Yeah, so that happened last night.
Okay.
And that was open to everybody. So I'll share that link on YouTube as part of, I think on Tuesday, I'm going to send out an email to the church like, hey, if you're interested in what's going on at General Convention, here's some things to look for. And I'll share that. But yeah, so Friday night was a chance for the presiding bishop, Michael Curry, to kind of reflect and close his 9-year ministry as presiding bishop. And then the nominees for presiding bishop got to kind of give their spiel. It also was joined by, and the House of Deputies were also electing essentially a Speaker of the House. And so that's a contested election this year. It's getting a little bit testy, I would say. Also, our colleague from the church in Martinez is standing for election to be the vice president of the House of Deputies. So we may have someone from our deanery elected as kind of as the vice president of the House of Deputies. The presiding bishop serves a 10-year term. So there's kind of a 6-month overlap with the next presiding bishop, and then you serve through 3 general conventions, and then you kind of have to spend a year tutoring your successor, and then you're off to retirement. So, and that's one of the main reasons why we decided to have General Convention this year, was not to extend Bishop Curry's primacy, because he has been kind of not in failing health, but has had a number of recurring health concerns and surgeries over the last year. So let's talk about a few possible things that might affect life here at St. Stephen's. So one, which will probably pass pretty darn easily, is going to be changes to the Good Friday readings. And I'll admit that this is one corner of the church where I disobey canon law quite regularly. The prayer book says on Good Friday, you're only supposed to read from the Gospel of John. That makes sense theologically because the Gospel of John is the only gospel that doesn't see the cross as a place of defeat, right? So earlier in John chapter 3, Jesus says, the Son of Man will be raised up and he will bring everyone to him, right? And so the cross is not defeat, it's exaltation. And that's why we always read from the Gospel of John on Good Friday. Historically, the Gospel of John was written at a time in which Jewish Christians and Jewish men and women were at their most antagonistic. And so throughout the Gospel of John, you're going to have the phrase, for fear of the Jews, come up again and again. We hear it most often in the story of the boy born blind, right? So there's this historical antagonism that was kind of captured in John's Gospel, and it, without a lot of kind of scaffolding by clergy, it's very easy to kind of slide into an anti-Semitism. And so changing or allowing for changes to the Good Friday readings is one way that we can kind of address and hopefully reject a reading of the Good Friday story that places blame on the Jewish authorities and is anti-Semitic in nature, and instead, kind of understands that there were more than, Jesus is rejected by more than just the religious authorities in and around Jerusalem on Good Friday. Another possible change is to Eucharistic Prayer C. Prayers A, B, and D were all updated at the last General Convention. Everybody asked, what about Star Wars? What about the Star Trek Eucharistic Prayer? So Eucharistic Prayer C will probably see some updates as well. The prayer book, if you read the prayer book, this Eucharistic prayer says, the God and Father of Abraham and Isaac, Jacob, there's just those three. A lot of clergy, myself included, will change that to the God of Isaac and Sarah, Jacob and Rachel, right? So those are probably the changes that are in store for Eucharistic Prayer C. Some other important resolutions. I'll just kind of.
Sorry, man. You mentioned the Star Wars one. Is that going to remain the same, or is that?
That's the one that's probably going to change. It'll probably be more gender inclusive, and it'll probably include this. And with Jacob, it gets interesting. Which wife do you include? Because he had multiple wives.
Okay. But they're not going to turn it down. It's going to be the same.
No, it'll probably be a move towards inclusive language and including the feminine figures in that story as well. So.
Why do you call it Star Wars?
Because that's the Star Wars or the Star Trek history. Because that's the one through the vast expanse of interstellar space, you called the created order into being, the planets and galaxies and their courses. It basically, there's a lot of just heavenly cosmological references, and so people call it the Star Trek prayer, the Star Wars prayer, because it mentions space.
That's probably where it changed.
That probably no.
Yeah, good.
No, it'll probably just be gender inclusive. It'll probably be a move towards gender inclusivity is the changes there. Yeah. So there's a budget, a proposed $143 million budget for the triennium, the 3 years from between 2025 and 2027. That may or may not affect life at St. Stephen's. When I was vicar at Christ the King, I started a campus ministry with our local community college, organized wrote a grant for basically cornhole and conversation, you know, the backyard game cornhole. So somewhere in the archives of the Episcopal Church is my name and the word cornhole, forever, which I'm very, very proud of. So there are opportunities for St. Stephen's to apply for grants at the national church level to help us engage in new ministries and support our neighbors. So that kind of does affect us, or might affect us. C0008 is really important. It would reduce diocesan apportionment to tech from 15% to 10%. So, as a church, we pay about 17% of everything that comes into St. Stephen's. You know, just as we ask people to tithe us and support our ministry, St. Stephen's forwards about 17% of our income to support the ministry of the diocese and the bishop. In turn, the Diocese of California gets 15% of the money that they get and forwards that on to the ministry and mission of tech. So this would reduce the diocesan apportionment from 15% down to 10%. So it would basically free up money at the diocesan level, which might trickle down. So two ways this would affect St. Stephen's. One, it might trickle down and it might lead to apportionment reduction in our diocese. So we would have, the diocese has to pay less to tech, maybe the parishes have to pay less to the diocese. The other thing is that there's a growing movement towards limiting diocesan apportionment to 10% as well. So, you know, if you look at the St. Stephen's budget, it's probably a little bit under $700,000 this year, and we spend, we spend at least $130,000 goes to the diocese. So if we could divide that into 3 and only send 2 parts, right, that could maybe save St. Stephen's somewhere in the order of $30,000 to maybe even $40,000 a year. So, we're watching this carefully because we're basically recognizing that as a church, we're a little too top-heavy, that we've got too many diocesan staff and not enough people, you know, in parishes helping minister. What I imagine will happen to handicap this is going to pass the House of Deputies north of 80% would be my guess, and it is less likely, it is more not likely. How many double negatives can I throw in a sentence? The House of Bishops are not going to pass this, is my expectation, because the House of Bishops is going to see the writing on the wall. Which leads us to, you know, how do we as a diocese communicate and support our bishop and share with our bishop our hopes for his ministry? Because I think what happens is when bishops don't take the time to say what my ministry is going to be about, their ministry is their staff. If they have lots of staff, then they're obviously doing lots of ministry. And so they're, by, you know, we're using the, what am I trying to say? Well, no, it's, we're using the kind of the transference that staff equals ministry, when really it's staff equals expense. And so if we can redefine ministry as supporting local parishes, we would radically change how our diocese is structured and where the money is and where the money goes. So this will be a really interesting thing to follow.
We give 17%, why is that? It sounds like more than other churches.
Nope, so that's one of the things that gets decided at diocesan convention is the apportionment rate. So we're apportioned 5% on the first $76,000 in revenue we're giving. And then we pay 18.5% on every dollar over that. So it shakes out to about a little over 17%.
That's the same across the board.
Yeah, and there's some limits as to how, so we actually should have paid more in apportionment this year, but because giving was up, but the trail, there's a limit as to how much apportionment can go up year to year, and so we hit that limit. And so our apportionment will probably go up next year because our giving has gone up, which is wonderful. But yeah, so that's something that's decided at diocesan convention. So, this is really interesting. This is a place where in committee yesterday, so there's a resolution that would define the Book of Common Prayer as a collection of liturgical resources, meaning not the red book that's in our pews. The House of Bishops approved this. The House of Deputies is likely to reject it because it's not clear. So General Convention says what is in the prayer book, but if we can't decide what is a prayer book, is it the red book, or is essentially what this is essentially asking is the Book of Common Prayer a document in the cloud that can be updated at any time? Or is the Book of Common Prayer something that we kind of do once in several generations? That's kind of the question at the heart of this, and we'll see what happens. There's also some diocesan mergers, which really doesn't affect us that much, but so the dioceses of Michigan are going to collapse. The Diocese of Wisconsin, I think there's 4 of them, they want to collapse into one diocese. There's a movement to elevate Navajo land to a missionary diocese, and to merge the missionary of Micronesia in with the Diocese of Hawaii. So just kind of some structural changes. There's also kind of a continuing dialogue with the United Methodist Church. So in 1996, the Episcopal Church authorized full communion with the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran, yeah, thank you. We're moving towards that with the United Methodist Church, but there's a lot of significant hurdles to overcome. So this would provide a roadmap towards full communion. It basically would be, the hang up is, so you're getting way more than you bargained for. In the back of your Book of Common Prayer, in the historical documents, there's something called the Chicago-Lambeth Quadrilateral. And it says there are 4 things that make a Christian church a Christian church: Jesus, the Old and New Testaments, the 2 sacraments of communion and baptism, and bishops. That's what makes a Christian church. How the Episcopal Church understands the ministry of the episcopate, of bishops, and how the Methodist Church is completely divergent. It doesn't mean one is wrong and one is right. They just have completely different approaches to it. And we need to work that out before we can have full communion. With the Lutheran Church, it was pretty easy. Do you believe in the creeds? The 2 creeds? Yes. Do you believe in the 2 sacraments? Yes. Do you believe in Jesus? Yes. Do you have bishops? Awesome. We need that same checklist with our Methodist siblings. So, yeah.
What about the succession of the bishopric, which we have in the Methodist Church?
Well, so that's one of the things around the ministry of the bishops that we need to work out. Yeah, exactly. So.
But why would we want to work it out?
Well, it's more just. My understanding is in the Methodist Church that the episcopate is a term of service, not a ministry. And so you essentially, it would be something like serving as the dean of the deanery in our denomination, where you've been around in the diocese for a long time, you know people, you have some kind of credibility, you get named to this position. But in the Methodist tradition, there's no consecration, there's no ontological kind of mark of that change. It basically is like, oh, I'm a bishop now, and then I go back to being a priest. Whereas in the Lutheran and the Episcopal and even Roman Catholic traditions, it's more of it's a recognition of a additional gift of the Spirit which empowers you for a very particular ministry and responsibility within the church, not kind of a temporary gig. It's kind of my 2 cents on it. So that's a heck of a lot of polity at you. Did I answer any questions, or are you leaving more confused than you came in? So,
Yes.
oh, good, good. Well, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. As I said, I'm going to be sending out an email that will hopefully kind of call people's attention to what's going on at General Convention. There are live streams, so anybody can kind of check into the house and see what's going on. There generally is some of the better preaching in the Episcopal Church is highlighted at General Convention. So if you want to hear some good preaching, we'll share those links out. But yeah, but that in a nutshell is the Episcopal Church and how we decide to run ourselves. So yeah.
What's the timeline, by the way, for this convention?
So this year it's 10 days total, but 8 days of meetings. So
It's already started.
So it started with committee meetings on Friday and some speeches, and then today the House of Deputies and the House of Bishops open for business.
Okay, and the final voting will be what, end of the year?
Yeah, so it'll close next Sunday, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So Sunday to Sunday this year. And it's in Louisville, Kentucky. Next year, so every year it tries to move provinces. So when I was there, it was in Maryland. The reason they chose Kentucky is because at the end of the service, they wanted as many people as possible to be within driving distance to welcome the new presiding bishop. I don't know when that service is taking place, but they basically where can people drive 5 or fewer hours and get the most number of people, and if you put it in Kentucky, that was kind of it. Whereas if we were up in Maine or in California, it would kind of limit how many different provinces could be represented. Just like ESPN, the West Coast gets no respect. So that same bias exists in church as it does in sports coverage. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you, guys.